An arsonist burns down a forest, causing millions of dollars in damage from burning homes. Jailing or fining him is in no way the government overstepping their bounds, as the arsonist just stole millions from people. But how about a person who did it out of just neglect? Or what about a company that did the same thing incredibly slowly over decades, but creates jobs and lower prices for its service? Is making them stop overstepping the law? And where does the government have the authority to stop them? We base all our laws on the Constitution. However, one branch of the government, the judicial, bases their rulings on something even older, the English legal law. The judicial branch was called for in the Constitution, and no one seemed to have any issues with continuing with the English style of courts. These are called implicit powers because it is implied and extrapolated from the Constitution versus explicit powers directly talked about in the Constitution. I highly recommend watching Crash Courses Government and Politics to learn more about implicit powers. English legal law was so accepted by the American people at the time that Jefferson complained to one of his fellow peers that the average person with a copy of the Constitution and a Black's Law book, which was a Cliff's Notes of the English law, now thinks they're a constitutional lawyer. Little did he know that that would degrade to people with just a Constitution. English legal law is incredibly complex and comprehensive in the attempt to be most fair to everyone. A concept called externality exists in law, where pretty much anything you do can have a negative or positive impact on someone else. You build a gorgeous home, the property values of the neighborhood go up, just because you did something with your property. You build a sewage plant nearby, all the property values drop, just because of something you did with your property. Should you be able to gain money from your fellow neighbors because they now have more money because of your beautiful home? And should you have to pay them money because their homes lost value thanks to your sewage plant? These are the sorts of questions judges must hammer out. Nothing one does is completely in a vacuum, and some are more invasive than others, and many are based on context and location. Something one person could easily do and harm no one out in the middle of the countryside could have dire consequences in the middle of the city. It's why the idea of regulation often feels so wrong to a person raised in the country, but is completely accepted and considered reasonable by people born and raised in the city. If all of these cases were to be dealt with by the courts, the judicial system would have to be enormous, and time, energy, and stress would be wasted by individual citizens or class action lawsuits on difficult-to-prove issues. This is especially true with large companies with lots of money to drag out legal proceedings for years. If it is an established precedent, then an easy time and money saver is to let regulations made by lawmakers stand and just hear the cases that challenge the lawmakers' rulings. Europe is a very population-dense area, so they have the majority of things regulated, while America is population-light and does not have nearly as many regulations, so the court hears way more cases and challenges than Europe. It's why America is internationally known for its lawsuits, while suing isn't really that common in Europe as the rules are pretty cut and dried. It is also why regulations on things like pollution are so vilified in the US, even though air, soil, and water pollution steals money and medical costs out of the average person's pocket every year, especially people in poor areas thanks to the externality location issue we discussed earlier. Even the blocking of sales of exotic pets or plants feels to the individual like oppression, even though when they escape or get released and begin destroying the natural ecosystem, they can cause as much damage and cost to farmers or homeowners as that arsonist who burned down the forest and inadvertently burned down those buildings. There's a video from DNews in the bottom bar discussing the issues of invasive pests. The reason the government has the power to regulate comes down to externalities and English law accepted by all the founding fathers. How much a government is allowed to regulate comes often down to a person thinking on the ability to grasp a large impact or how densely the population was where you grew up. Ultimately, the job of the government is to provide the most freedom of everyone to swing their fists while catching the people who don't stop at their neighbor's nose, but sometimes proving that a bunch of noses were slightly hit over a long period of time to the point of damage can be really hard to prove in court. So the courts just decide to wait and hear the laws to decide whether they are constitutional or unconstitutional, which saves everyone a lot of stress, money, and headache.